Parishwide Drainage Liaison Committee, Wednesday, November 1st. With that, I would like to remind everyone to silence all electronic devices, and if you would like to speak on any item tonight, please fill out the blue slip. We're going to take those for about another 15 or 20 minutes. We want to make sure that we don't end up with a pile of them and then people's time gets shortened, so we'd like to know anyone who'd like to speak, please get your blue slips filled out to the front. With that, I'll go to roll call. Miss Kathy.
Yes, sir. Mr. Andrepont?
Here.
Mr. Barris?
Here.
Mr. Guidry?
Here.
Mr. Landry?
Here.
Mr. McMillan?
Here.
Mr. White?
Here.
And Chairman Scott.
Here.
Everyone's present.
Thank you, Miss Kathy. With that, we'll move to item number 3, receive report from staff regarding the latest proposed revisions to Chapter 26 of the Code of Ordinance of Calcasieu Parish, Louisiana, pertaining to drainage standards, and receive any public comments on the new draft. Mr. Beam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief, and then I'll hand it to Alan. Just as a refresher, the changes that Alan's going to go over in his presentation are strictly from the most recent Drainage Committee meeting you held back in August, I believe, 8th. So those are what he's going to cover. Of course, the rest of the ordinance has been in previous versions, and we're asking for any input from you and any of the public on these just over the past whatever time that is since August 8th. And that's, at that point, if it's okay, I'll let Alan go ahead and present those.
All right, Mr. Wainwright.
Thank you, Chairman Scott. I have a PowerPoint for y'all and just a few slides. We're going to cover kind of what's in the ordinance, the key changes, then we'll cover the changes from August 8th, as Brian mentioned. So, all right, see if I can get her going. There we go. All right, first I'd like to just remind or refresh everyone's memory that, the basis and the framework for the ordinance changes previously passed by the police jury. Really 3 key initiatives can be, had additional detail, but basically the first objective is maintain or lower existing water surface elevation and laterals in the receiving systems as new development takes place. Protect and enhance the flood storage volumes within the established 100-year floodplain, and to assure that all new structures being built parish-wide would meet the minimum freeboard requirements, which we consider really the 3 categories of main things we can do to improve our long-term efforts to reduce property damage. So, as we've noted several times before, everything is contained in Chapter 26. The document there, and it's roughly 190 pages, and still amounts to about the same number. There's probably about 30 to 35 pages with actual changes on them. We're not going to go through them all tonight again, but we will just to give you a reminder on that. So, key things that are in the ordinance. I think sometimes we've gone through such a lengthy process now that I think it's kind of important to refresh the key things that are in there in kind of one-liners, so that we can then focus on the at least last round of changes. So I'll go through these just so we can kind of make sure we're on the same page of what's really in the ordinance. There's a few other things, little corrections and details, but I think these capture the bulk of the big items. So the conceptual plan process has been revised, basically requiring a conceptual plan for new development. As-built drainage layout plans is a new thing. On-site inspections during construction. Performance standards for all new developments. So those relate back to the items that I just referenced. Having new development meet a standard of really not hurting the watershed in terms of new runoff or filling in the floodplain. Those are really the keys to good performance when it comes to drainage. Providing for a runoff management plan, which is really, change from a drainage impact analysis to more of a plan that just tells us how you're going to maintain your development's runoff and mitigate the fill. A fee in lieu of detention is something that's new. We do this to recognize the fact that some sites are just too small to do on-site detention. So there needs to be an alternative, and so the fee in lieu of detention is that alternative. Field mitigation, we just talked about, is preserving the floodplain storage. The minimum freeboard requirement for all new structures is in there. Additional right-of-way for gravity drainage laterals. Improved detention pond standards, this is where the 25-year design standards are at. And the minimum 18-inch culverts as part of the culvert permitting process and really the sizing of all new pipe. So with that, those are the big things that are really covered and improved in the document. And now we're just going to go through a list of really the changes since the August 8th version, draft number 2. And I'm not going to go through every one of these in detail. So I'm just going to kind of pick out the ones that I think are important. There's a couple in there that are probably bigger than the rest. A lot of these, as we went through the extra meetings, you know, there were good questions. We made some adjustments. We clarified a lot of things. You know, when you get more and more people to read a document of this size, you realize that some of the clarity might not be there that you need as it goes forward. So we're able to put some clarifiers in there and clean it up just a little bit. So I welcomed, you know, appreciate all the comments that we have there. But so we have 3 slides of changes. I didn't count them, so maybe, I don't know, 6 times 3, about 18 that are listed here roughly. So the first one is vested developments. We have a vesting clause. We have, basically, that's a grandfathering clause. We are recommending that upon approval of these ordinances or adoption, that there be at least a 6-month starter period where these kick in. So there's opportunity for any developments in the pipeline to finish up and continue under the current ordinances. And then after that, you begin to submit under the new ordinances. The third one on this particular slide is the 25-year design standard for new ponds. I think that's critical. We're clarifying here that that is the number that will ultimately decide the size of the pond in terms of its volume. Really, 26-182 for the general is probably one that got discussed as much as anything in the process that relates to sewer, believe it or not. And the wording was, I think, confusing. We definitely want to lay to rest that confusion. So you could have read it to where if you had a lot or a development where the lots were bigger than 1 acre, above 1 acre generally, that it would have been impossible to have a mechanical plant in that subdivision and have it drain to the roadside ditch that would obviously be there. We did not want that confusion. So in essence, many of these changes, we took a lot of the sewer things out. So the only thing that's really left in there in terms of sewer discharge is not allowing sewer effluent from a mechanical plant or anything else to go through, directly through a detention pond that may be created or caused to be built due to the development, so that we, you know, you want to keep that water quality in a detention pond, you know, at a high quality. Obviously, you don't want it to become some sewer thing, especially in our hot summers where, you know, we get long periods without some rain. So we've really modified the sewer a lot to try and clean up any idea that right now your current other ordinances establish basically that at 1 acre and below, you're going to be building a community sewer system, which you have an ability to discharge that where you need to. Above 1 acre is where it gets to be if you, there's no requirement for a community sewer system, so you may very well end up with mechanical plants. The modern mechanical plant, after talking with DHH and them guys, really has a very, very low discharge because now they have the reduction beds and things like that. But so it's still possible some discharge will get to the roadside ditch, but we feel like a combination of not many developments of that nature and the idea that these would generally have large lot frontages, that was something that we could adjust in this ordinance that was definitely cleaned up, turned to language, and not going to really change a whole lot. One of our main concerns was building a lot of high maintenance miles and I don't think this gives that away. I think the reality is we're not going to get that, the average development now is small lots. So I don't think this is going to play in a lot. We'll, we can always come back and adjust that if it becomes a big problem later. Like I say, I think best not to just cover every one of these because we could talk at length. The impact fee, really, I think we had looked at clarifying that. It's really a fee in lieu of detention. So it's really a one-time thing where if you're not doing on-site detention, you would pay a fee. That fee is to be set later by the police jury. We have offered a number at 22 cents a square foot per impervious area. We haven't tried to change that or go back and recalculate it at this point. Sort of stick with that for now. All right, so second set, again, just more changes. We redefined the pre-development condition, which is critical in a new development. You're trying to say the goal is to have your pre-development and your post-development equal. So you have to define what is pre-development. Well, we're defining pre-development as 5 years prior to application for development of that site, so that there is, what we see sometimes is the land can be cleared and altered significantly by the time the first permits are issued to do anything. And because of that, it sort of alters what's pre. It actually raises the runoff value on the pre-development end so that now your post-development doesn't look as much like as big a gap anymore. In order to fix that, you try to establish pre-development back at a time where it was more or less natural before it's been reshaped and graded and the runoff's already been somewhat accelerated. So aerial photography, police jury and everyone else now has access to aerial photography that will really be quite easy to establish roughly what a site should be labeled at in terms of its pre-development condition. We did get a question in the process that there were a lot of shoulds left in the document, which leave a lot of room for, I guess, discretion and it maybe not being consistent. And one of the things the developers and everyone strive for in this is they do want a consistent set, regardless of what ends up getting passed. Consistency is the key. So the should brings in the opportunity for some inconsistencies. We did clean up a few of those. Pretty much made them shalls. They were put in there to provide leeway. They were put in there to allow for discretion, but again, that's the same discretion that will create problems on the other end. So you know what, it's probably just best to call it out with a shall and move on, which is pretty much the norm when you write ordinances anyway. 18-inch pipe is in this set, and this is an attempt to sort of do a couple things. Number one, obviously the bigger the pipe where it fits, the more it's going to carry. It's going to pass a little bit more debris. It's going to pass a few more soccer balls and things like that through the diameter of the pipe. We spend a tremendous amount of time fishing balls and footballs and limbs and everything you can imagine out of these culverts. So for years, the minimum size has been 15-inch pipe. And it's not all bad, except that if you can go up to 18, you get a better capacity and you will get a little more debris go through there freely. The downside of that is in some cases, 18 just won't fit in our ditches, and our topography is very flat, this, that, next. So we have provided in this thing for the engineer, parish engineer, to have a discretion to make that call that 15 or 12 or something else is acceptable based on the conditions that are out there. So we've made that change. The last bullet on this slide is really that detention pond, clarity, water quality thing. That's where one of those changes were made. We go to the last slide. I know these, I do realize, of course, these are very detailed and hard to read, but just trying to get them on here so that everyone can realize what has been changed. Best can. The second one on here is about field mitigation, and it really begs the other half of the question is, what floodplain, or, one of the questions come up is, who's defining the floodplain? Is there any attempt by the police jury to redefine the floodplain? So we want to make clear that the floodplains will be the ones defined by FEMA for as long as they're defining them. So that's the first thing. The parish does know of, and we all know, that the maps are somewhat inaccurate, and you can't trust them down to the nth degree. We have to have a way to advise people that when they're not in a floodplain by the map, that they are probably actually in one in reality, to help them save themselves, to protect them. That's what the freeboard ordinance sort of does when you go parish-wide. That's the number one thing we can do, is to have that freeboard ordinance parish-wide so that that magic line on a FEMA map no longer controls whether you build at a good elevation or not. Field mitigation, though, still applies in and will only apply in the FEMA designated floodplains. So that's enough. I mean, that's the goal, to preserve those floodplains over the years to come. FEMA's mapping techniques, they're doing it up and down the coast now in pilot programs. It's just a matter of time before they're back to Calcasieu Parish remapping our parish at a higher, basically, survey accuracy. And they won't remodel it all, but they'll remap it all on better accurate maps, and those floodplains will change then. So we're not trying to change them. We won't have to wait, because FEMA will change them for us. Inspections, have clarification here. Second to last bullet on this one is again, we are developing checklists based off of established standards, and American Society of Civil Engineers has a really good checklist for infrastructure and construction that I think is going to be the primary basis for this. So one of the questions when we go out to inspect is, when do we inspect? We're not going to be on site every day. We want to be there at critical milestones to inspect what needs inspecting, but not be in the way. So you use a checklist with estimated times and a kind of a call-in system to do that, and it will be publishing those actual checklists. We had it in here before where we really would have worked with the developer and his engineer to establish a checklist sort of per site, let them have some influence on the checklist. That was sort of one of the questions. That may get out of hand a bit, and rather have more of a formalized checklist that we provide. So we'll follow ASCE standards and other engineering standards for inspection on that, and be reasonable, and we'll put those out. That's one of the things, the reason why you do need a 6-month phase in of some of this stuff, to make sure we have an opportunity to provide those to everyone who's going to be doing design or building, and to provide any training that may be necessary to make sure we can fulfill all this stuff. So again, I think all of y'all have received something that kind of goes through these in detail, the actual wording. I just want to kind of briefly cover them. The last slide in the presentation is the timeline. We kind of carry this slide all along, and obviously today's the 1st. We would anticipate coming back to this committee on the 9th, planning and zoning on the 14th, and then possibly the police jury on the 16th is the schedule as we know it now. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions relative to the changes or anything else you have. And I think that's the end of my presentation.
All right, Mr. Andrepont.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alan, I know that the big landowners in this parish have concerns and with the issue at hand. And just for my own, well, the committee's information, I should say, not only for mine, but how close did you work with those since the last time we met to get their input as to what the concerns are?
So we worked with the group, APG group, that for the extension. There was a number of meetings. We were not involved in every meeting. Myself, some from our staff, depending on the needs for the meeting. So, Brian, you might recall the exact count of meetings. that were had, and I would assume that the groups that you're talking about were, to a degree at least, involved in that process. That's the only process we've had in the extended time period.
Okay, that's all for now. I yield back.
Mr. Bears.
Thank you. I just caught something you may want to make, I don't know if you want to make a note of this, but it was the first time you talked about the 18-inch culverts, and you said where certain design standards may apply, and then you go down, and then you said they have the ability to change it when field conditions warrant. I'd like it to be field conditions and just the black or white. Can the ditch fit it or not? Not, oh, well, it doesn't, how the layout of the guy's design or whatever. I don't want it to be,
Well,
when you say design, I don't want it,
Let
That seems kinda vague. I don't
talk,
want-
let me give you a few things. So that's a good question, but there are some things besides just fit that engineers look at. One of the critical things, believe it, it's kind of in the math, and whether you really believe it or not, in reality is interesting, to me at least, a discussion. But when you're doing a design on a pipe size, there's a certain slope, and there's diameters, and there's calculations. In that calculations, one of the key ingredients is the velocity of the water that will be passing through that culvert. If you get just the right amount of velocity, you can help, it's self-cleansing. If you get too little velocity, it clogs up more, at least in theory. If you get too much velocity, you have scour. So you're trying to strike a balance. So there are occasions where that needs to be met that may outweigh the need for just larger pipe. So I like the fact that the engineers that'll be doing this, they understand when it should apply and when it shouldn't. There are a lot of challenges to fitting 18-inch culverts in our ditch. Let's make no bones about that. It's better overall, but there'll be challenges, and I think you don't want to make the cost exorbitant to the development just for that. I think that's where we have to be willing to strike a balance for good design over just sort of blanket policy. So I guess that's my case on that. That's why we wanted that discretion to remain in there.
Thank you, Mr. Barris. Any other comments? I have a couple quick comments, if I can, Mr. Wainwright. I like the way that we've cleaned up some of the discretion. I like the shalls much better than, when I read the document now. I like the fact that it's a little more, this is the way it will be. So I do like that. Inspections, I think the only way this will actually work is if there's an inspection process. So the public holds this body accountable to basically any infrastructure that we're in control of, or whether it's a road or a street. Well, the only way that we can do that is to hold the people that are building this or developing accountable. The only way we can do that is with an ordinance, or we'll end up where we are today, which is, just business as usual. So I like the inspection part of it. I'm going to talk real quick about a question in the fee in lieu of. That, when we set that number, is that going to be prior to June, or is that going to be over the next couple of weeks? When is that discussion? Just for people's information, when will we set that?
Well, we really haven't picked a date, although I could easily see it, unless you want additional math or exercise that establishes the number, done and completed in advance of you approving it. It could be an additional item the night that you actually go through with the ordinance. It's a very simple thing right now. It's 22 cents a square foot, very simple calculation. So only if you want us to look at a more elaborate process of fees. We have had one of our jurors has asked me to look at, sort of the something a little more. And again, people, as you look across the country, you see more elaborate fee schemes, if you would. Ours is a flat fee. It's very simple. It's very fair. But if you ask us for some other type of fee schedule, then we would have to have more time to, dive off into that. So at this point, I see no reason why not to think, though, that you would set it as a secondary item to whenever you take action as a jury.
But if it is a hot topic, we have till June.
You have
18th.
until, you have really, you you have a lot of options there. At the point where you set the fee and you put it in place, obviously we start charging it.
And the last thing is more of a statement, you don't have to answer back to it. You know, when I read June 2018, that seemed like an eternity compared to the problems we're facing today. But I understand people in the middle of something and trying to finish the projects they're in. So just a statement, can some of this start earlier, some of the end of it, and you don't have to answer it right now, it's just for chew until maybe next week. Could some of these things actually begin to take place now that doesn't affect basically large developments or major developments? So what can we do starting January or March that doesn't really affect the big picture but begins to help a little sooner than the 3 years we've been working on it? I'll leave that for a later date. Thank you, Mr. Wainwright. Any other questions from the jury? All right, with that, I do have Mr. Beam. Mr. Got any questions? No. 1, 2, 3. So we do have 6 speakers tonight. I don't have any. Most of them are marked general comments. Before we call up our first speaker, I want to make sure that everyone knows this meeting has been called for the intent of discussing the proposed ordinances as changed or revised in this copy. So we want to keep our conversation to the exact ordinances. We're going to give each speaker 5 minutes tonight. And if and when we have enough time, I'm going to tell you right now, maintenance and capital improvement, that is a discussion that will be had. And if we got a few minutes, we might take comments. But tonight's discussion is on the revised ordinance as proposed right now. So with that, if you want to, last chance, last call, if you do want to turn in a blue slip, please get it to Miss Jessica. And now we have 7. So I'm going to let you be the, you get to pick them. That way I'm impartial. Mr. Bart Yakinzak. Did I get it right? No? Wes said no.
Easier said than spelled.
It's a significant upgrade.
I'm going to let him say his name and address for the record.
That's fine. I don't think I'll take that long. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I'm Bart Yakubzak, 1450 William Street, 2nd floor, Lake Charles, Louisiana, 70601. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I'm here in a couple of regards. Since I came back to Lake Charles, I've worked as an attorney for landowners. I've dealt with drainage issues and coastal issues over the years. I'm here with 2 hats, though. I'm also on the board of APG, and I'm here to make a couple of comments about the changes. I would say a little more, but I certainly respect the chairman's limitation and that we want to stick to these ordinance changes. I want to first say that I had what I thought was a very productive meeting with your staff today. We had a few members and the administrator of the task force that APG assembled of all of the city mayors in the parish, together with some professionals, architects, engineers, lawyers, what we think is a diverse group to add to this conversation on the drainage crisis. I thought that this meeting today, including the administrator of that task force, Mr. Bob Smith, went very well. The parish staff has agreed to work on some things that we've asked for them in this regard, with regard to this ordinance. I delivered 8 pages of identified questions, very specific questions with regard to the ordinances, the changes, and the ordinance as to its current form. It's still existing form to Mr. Wainwright, and he's agreed to look at those and get back to us very quickly. We think that as a result of today's meeting, that another meeting between parish staff and the task force assembled by APG will take place early next week, and that we will have even more progress by next Wednesday. Without deviating from those ordinances too much, I will just quickly say that we've always thought that this is either a 3-legged stool or a 4-legged chair. And the 3 legs are obviously, one is we recognize as an ordinance, and that an ordinance needs to happen. We all still disagree on the timing of the ordinance. We understand that the parish has let out a request for proposal or request for qualifications for a group to reaffirm and approve what our staff knows or thinks it knows about our system, and to look for projects and improve strategies, and to study our watershed, and to come up with a project analysis and a full-scale watershed plan. That has happened. I'm not sure that it's been awarded yet, but that request has been made. We think that is going to that's going to complement what the staff is suggesting to you as jurors, and/or change it. So firstly, we think we would wait and adopt an ordinance after we get that work product. We understand that the parish wants to check the box on the ordinance and knock it down and get it out of the way. So our next ask will simply be, if we have to vote on November 16th on this ordinance, that we work towards an agreement that some of those other boxes are checked before the ordinance goes into effect. And I think that if Mr. Wainwright and the staff and APG and the citizens continue to work together, that there's no reason we can't get through this together. And I made the comment, I'll make it to you guys, I made the comment to staff today that I was a part, as a younger lawyer, to a lot of PowerPoint presentations when the parish was trying, years back, leading back 2 or 3 years. I know it feels like an eternity to you guys that you've been working on a drainage ordinance, but I went to those meetings, and they were PowerPoints, and they were rather vague. This is what we need to do. This is what we want to do. And then in April, this big, giant 200-page ordinance comes out. You have accomplished something never accomplished before in this parish. You have the attention of so many people that are taking time out of their work days to focus on drainage in this crisis. You have accomplished that. You have more attention on this than ever. So I think it's a time for diplomacy to try to get all these people on the same page and how to see how the parish can go forward together as a government and the citizens. And we asked, well, we appreciate the time to comment, and we compliment the parish on the staff continuing to work with us to see if we can all be on the same page, so that on the 16th we're here. I think there's a potential on the 16th to be here together saying we've accomplished something, and not in a contrary nature, in opposing one another. So thank you for your time.
Mr. Guidry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for being here. And one of the things that I totally was extremely happy to hear was the conversations that's been going on between the parish and you guys. And that means a lot to us as jurors, because the conversation, it's open. And we've always wanted to be as transparent as we possibly can be as a governing body. And what you said tonight is going to make us work even harder to give you that level of respect that you guys need and deserve as to what we're going to do as a governing body. So please, by all means, continue to do what you do, because your level of professionalism has always been there, boy. And we can't say enough for what you've done in giving us input on what we can do as a whole as a governing body. So by all means, we thank you and continue to do what you're doing.
Thank you.
Mr. Andrew Pont.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, want to thank you. The definitive word, as far as I'm concerned, is input from individuals like yourself, organizations that you represent. I only speak for myself on this committee, and I can tell you this. I'm not going to vote on anything until we're at the point that at least we have met 50-50 or met in the middle of the road. And I think it's only fair to us, and it's only fair to you. And that's where I stand on this. And I do want to thank you again for being here and representing the people and making the statement that you made here tonight. It means a lot to me.
Thank you.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions for Mr. Yakubczak? Thank you so much for coming.
I appreciate it.
Our next speaker will be Mr. John Bradford. Name and address for the record, please, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is John Bradford. My address is 4431 West Prion Lake Road. And I have been before this committee back in August concerning subdivision plans. And I'd like to say that I like most of the stuff in the ordinance, but there's some issues. One issue is an engineering drainage plan has to be submitted. It's the timing of that engineering drainage plan and when it's submitted that, to me, is important to the public. Because if the public doesn't know what type of drainage and where it's going to go and how much water is going to go onto their land based upon the new development, then they don't know whether they're for it or against it. They don't know whether or not they have so much concern about it, they want to go hire their own expert to controvert it or to support it. So why can't, if you're going to have it anyway, have it done before the initial preliminary approval? So that the public, if you want to be transparent, give the public the information before you vote to approve the subdivision or the development in any form. All I'm asking for is the information that they're going to have to do anyway. The other issue that I would like to represent or ask you, we talk about 25 years, okay? What are you really talking about? How many inches? Are we talking about the rain that occurred in Beaumont that was predicted to come over here, so we could have had a 20-inch rain in 2 days? Are we talking about a 10-inch rain? What are we talking about so that developers and the people know, what are we planning for? What are we talking about? That's my questions, and that's my comments about this. I'm not for it or against it right now. I just don't know enough to be for or against.
All right, Mr. Landry first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alan, would you explain to him the 25-year? I think that what happened in Houston and Beaumont was like, wasn't that a 1,000-year event? I mean, I think that's what it was called. So try to put in perspective what a 25-year event might be.
Okay, so, number one, yes, I didn't get the year of the Beaumont, and obviously it's well off the chart, so we'll go with that and assume it's very high, maybe. We're probably more close to 500 years, so in scale, tremendous. So, couple things. This design numbers like 5-year, 10-year, 25-year. First off, depending on the methodologies you're following and depending on the type of thing you're designing, it does move around a bit. So it's complicated at best to answer. So, but to sort of simplify it and over-round it off a little bit for you guys, depending, and again, without holding up a chart and we're going through a lot of specifics. You might put the 5-year storms in the 3 to 5 inch rain, okay, area. Then you might put the 10-year storms in the 7 and above, maybe 7 to 10, and then when you're looking at 25 years, you're getting up into 12, maybe 14 inches. Again, it depends on a lot of things, so just know that it's sort of a band depending on the methodology you're looking at. So you might be designing for, let's just pick 12 as a good number to talk about for the 25-year design storm. That's a tremendous amount of rain, obviously. And the design storm is bigger than and I don't want to get too engineering on you, but the design storm is bigger than, because it's a hypothetical perfect storm that falls over the entire watershed at once. We get big rains and they do fall over the entire watersheds, but a perfect storm, if you would, doesn't often happen, although they just had some in Houston area in Orange. So the number, put it in about the 12-inch over a 24-hour period. It moves from there depending on what you're doing exactly, but that's what we're talking about and from a scale standpoint. Problem with that is, the reason why we're wanting to move up from, say, 7 or 8 inches to the 12-inch rain is a lot of, number one, you're talking about a tremendous amount of volume of water when you do the math on that. When it falls over square miles, inches over square miles is actually a lot of water. So the reason why you want to move up, though, from a higher standard is it's a better, that the probability of that storm being exceeded in any one given year is what you really got to relate it to. So for a 5-year storm, when you're designing things to that, you're assuming that that facility you're designing will possibly be overwhelmed, has a 20% chance in any one given year of being exceeded. That's the 5-year storm. When you go to a 10-year, you know, you got a 10% chance in any given year. And then when you go to a 25-year storm, you got a 4% chance of that storm being that bigger than the facility you're designing can handle. So it's all about levels of risk when you're assigning these things. And for our area, the level of risk at 25 years is that you got a 4% chance in any given year that thing's going to get too much water to hold. The other end of this issue is Mother Nature seems to be giving us statistically these storms at a faster pace than ever before. So the idea that it only comes around every 25 years is very misleading. We've had several occasions this year where we've had storms exceed, here in Calcasieu Parish, 10-year events in any particular area. So we get several of these a year in various areas, and so you have to, when you're assigning design standards, you're assigning levels of risk that you're willing to take. And so that's why 25 is important to us. It's a better insurance policy for all involved.
Well, look, 25 years means nothing as far as rainfall. You've got to have looked at it, I believe, and said, this is what the rainfall was. This is 25 years, it's 10 inches, it's 12 inches, it's 15 inches, 25 inches over a period of time. That's all I'm asking. You've got to have made that calculation. If you haven't made that calculations, how do you know when you say a 25-year, what risk are we taking? Now, you say 5,000 years or 500 years old. I want to beg, I'm not that old. And I was here in the 80s when a whole bunch of my people flooded and Oak Park flooded. And so I want to tell you, these storms come, and I just want to know what you're talking about.
And so, and if I can, I mean, so I think it's about 12 inches in 24 hours is what it would do. And of course, whenever we started this a couple of years ago, I mean, we were looking at 100-year. But, you know, there has to be a balance between what people can afford. And, you know, 25-year, yeah, it is going to be an increase in cost. And our risk has gotten a lot better than where we were. But yet, the 100-year, I don't think we can get there. I mean, and that's what was decided. When you start talking about developers and what kind of cost, I mean, it can be done, but there's a point, you know, that's it doesn't make a lot of sense to go beyond that.
I'll admit I'm not an engineer, and so I had no idea what 25.
Yeah. And believe me, I'm not either.
And so I'm glad to know that it's around 12 inches in a day.
You done, Mr.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm finished.
Mr. Bears.
Thank you. I guess this might be a Mr. Crane question. Can you speak to the suggested rearranging of the order that he was talking about?
Yes, sir. The ordinance at this point in time gives us the flexibility of when someone goes to hearing, for them to provide the drainage impact analysis, you know, before they do engineering or during the engineering phase of it. And we do it as a condition. In other words, we do it as a condition of approval that they have to do that. So I think what Mr. Bradford is asking is that why not make someone do that prior to that? That is a cost. I mean, and certainly that can happen. And we can actually require, you know, a drainage impact analysis to be done prior to that. We do have that option to do that. He's saying make it mandatory.
And
Make a should a shall.
but I would be willing to compromise. Look, I was here when they gave nothing, zero, as far as where they were going to drain, how much they were drained, what they're going to do. If they could at least give you a potential or a proposed of what they're looking at, where they're going. You know, I mean, these guys who are going to spend money on this are looking at it, can I subdivide this and can I drain it and where I'm going to drain it? And I know they look at it early on, but they don't give us any information. They make you all anxious as to what they're going to do. When you don't have information, when the public doesn't understand, they sometimes look at it the worst, and they get irrational. And I want to say, look, give us some ideas so we know ahead of time before you pass something. Because you're passing something and you say, well, we'll get to it later. You're kicking the can down the road. Right. At least, we have a 186-page drainage study, so it's got to be important. If it's important to you for 186 pages, it ought to be important enough for us to look at how they're going to drain, what they're going to do.
I like it.
All right, I'm going to go to Mr. White real quick. Mr. White?
That's part of the way the ordinance is revised is for the pre-existing floodplain that Alan is working with before anything can be cleared off of any land or any work to commence. It has to have a pre-existing floodplain. So I think with that being done prior to when it comes to Wes and them for approval, we already know how it drained prior to any work happening. So I think with the new ordinance, that will be captured on the front end. Mr. Allen, would you like to speak on that as well?
I would.
Go ahead, Mr.
Just,
Wainwright.
I don't know that it'll totally convince Mr. Bradford, but I do want to maybe understand, Kevin, you're touching on a very important thing. One of the changes inside the ordinance from old to new is, in the old way, we did what was called, Third West call it now correctly, as a drainage impact analysis, and I've told you this before. That was an analysis to try and figure out if you were going to have any impact. Many of those analyses would come back with, we're having very little, if no impact, and we need to be allowed to drain our water down this particular ditch, wherever it may be. So you had a process going on where basically the study was there to prove that we were going to have a very insignificant impact. The problem with that is, on a case-by-case basis, one development at a time, it does become very small and incremental. And what we know now is the long-term cumulative effect of that is that our systems are overwhelmed. So the change in the new ordinance to a runoff management plan flips the script on that a bit, and that we're no longer going to study if you're having an impact or not. We're going to make, your plan will be to tell me how you're going to design your site so that you have no new runoff coming off your site after you development. So putting it further up in the process, it's an interesting thing. I'm not necessarily in total agreement with that. I like it where it's at. We have flexibility. It's early in the process where you can find out if you're going to be able to do what you're going to do. But in essence, your plan is already saying in advance that I'm going to have no impact by design. I think the change there is significant, and that's why we're changing the name and the process.
Thank you, Mr. Wainwright. Mr. Landry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Alan, let's just say we had a situation on a project that I know y'all are going to take a look at it ahead of time, and you look at it and you're saying, like, there's just no way they're not going to be able to do this. That may be a situation where you may say you need to do this in advance. I mean, could that happen?
Well, I think
if it's something that you're looking at and say, I don't think that there's just no way possible that they can have zero impact.
Reason why the conceptual plan plays into that, and why we think that's an important part of the process, is when they're going to come in with that conceptual plan. This is not a lot of things, not a lot of engineering and design, just laying it out.
Right.
You know, if you don't have a significant, if you're doing a development that's going to have to do a runoff management plan, if you're doing a subdivision, and you don't have a significant area already set aside for your detention and your field mitigation, and you're right smack dab in the middle of a floodplain or anywhere else you're going to need those things, that's why the conceptual plan, in that very first meeting, we can tell them, look, you probably got way more lots here than you're going to end up with, because you're going to have to do these other things you skipped.
Right.
So, but these guys that develop, they have engineers too, and they're good at this stuff. They will immediately adjust, and they won't come in with conceptual plans that don't have a detention pond. They already don't. They come in now with a lot of that. So I don't see a lot of train wrecks, especially when the goal of the plan is to, they know in advance, come in with a site that is neutral to the watershed after you develop it. That's the goal. So do what you need to do to stay neutral to the watershed, and then we're going to all be fine.
You know, and I just didn't want to see somebody, they spend a whole lot of money on all this engineering, and then they come and then the project's turned down and they don't get their zoning changed. I mean, we don't want that to happen.
That's what I call a train wreck. We don't want that to happen
Right,
either.
exactly.
We want that to be mitigated long before they get that
And
far into
you're
engineering.
comfortable with that? You thought that's going to be,
Yes, sir.
okay, thank you.
Any other question? All right, with that, Mr. Bill LeBlanc. Name and address for the record, please.
Bill LeBlanc, I live at 710 Roberta Drive in Sulphur. I just want to thank y'all for what you're taking on here, because you had a big task. And I just had 3 questions about what you got proposed tonight, the changes that's coming up. And one of them was on the hydraulics of these culverts that you're talking about changing maybe from 18 to 15, or maybe even, I heard 12 stated during the presentation tonight. I'd like to see a little bit more research put into this thing to where we get engineering involved in this thing, because you can change the hydraulics by doing with a different shaped culvert. When we start changing sizes and allowing this development to have 18-inch and this development to have 15-inch, no matter whether it's real or not, the public out there sees that as, this guy got away with 15-inch and I got to do 18-inch. If you go with a common size, the shape of that culvert can dictate the hydraulics of what you got going on. And that's just from a layman's terms, you know. I don't know that much about it. I can't calculate it for you or anything else, but I've seen it work, you know, in some of the situations I've been in. I'm an API inspector, and we've had to go into some of those scenarios from time to time. The other thing that I'd like to not criticize, I don't want to criticize anything, but I don't really care for the mitigation portion of this thing, you know, because if a guy's got enough money, you know, then maybe his drainage is not that important. That's the appearance it gives when you start talking about mitigation. You know, you can buy yourself out of this for so many dollars. The only example I got for that is how much it costs to kill somebody. You know, I mean, may be worth it sometime. I know a lot of people look at me that way, but the other thing is inspection. The only other thing I want to ask about is inspection, and I've dealt with this a lot throughout my career in industry. Training is going to be crucial for these people, and when I talk about training, I'm not talking about reading a book, and yesterday you was working for XYZ, and today you're an inspector. When you're doing a project out there in the field, and I do a few things, I'm not a contractor. I don't ever be called that, but I mean, I build a few houses here and there. And the thing about it is, when you run into somebody that's knowledgeable and they know what you're talking about, there's no issues. There's no issues. It's either black or it's white. And when you get these other people in here, just the training, I'd like for you guys to pay a lot of attention to the training that you give these folks that are going to be responsible for bringing this thing, you know, to a good end. And I mean, you're heading in the right direction. You know, there's a lot of issues I'd like to talk about that affect me personally. That's not what this meeting's about, and I understand that. But those things can come in the future once you get this big problem solved. And we got a big problem. And thank y'all for what you're doing. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. LeBlanc. Mr. Wayne, any jurors first? Just in case you might want to add to something Mr. White has, Mr. Wainwright, hang on one second. Mr. White.
No, I just wanted to tell Mr. Bill, thank you for coming to this evening, and words spoken from a true inspector for sure. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Wainwright.
All right, I want to thank him as well. Good questions, especially on the field mitigation. I just kind of want to make sure we don't get off the mark on what this field mitigation is all about. So a lot of people might think of wetlands mitigation, and that's an important process too, but in that process, your site may be destroying some wetlands and you go somewhere off-site and maybe even another state or wherever, and you end up buying credits in a bank somewhere for that wetland, so there's some exchange or balance. So what we're talking about here, though, is much more than that. It's on site specific. So what we're talking about here is if you bring in 1,000 yards of dirt into the floodplain to build your pad, to build up your site, whatever you got to do to make the building structure work, that you're on site excavating as well 1,000 yards to put it back into the floodplain on site. So that there's as you move your dirt around on your site, there is a balance so that the overall floodplain has not been reduced at that point in the floodplain. So we do allow for some within the watershed exchanges, because sometimes that may be needed, but nothing to the level of, or maybe some of the times you see stuff at the wetlands, the way that is handled. We're talking about more of an on-site, case-by-case balance of your dirt work so that the floodplain is preserved on your site, so that you can't erase yours from the floodplain and essentially take the storage there from everyone else who's in that same watershed with you.
Did you want to speak to the design of the culverts, the shapes? Does that affect anything?
Well, no, I think we're good on that. I think
Okay.
we acknowledge the shape, arch pipe, things like that, boxes have effects. And as they get into the scenarios, I mean, all these culverts need to be designed for as close to the minimum needed to meet the design standard. You don't want to over-design a lot of stuff, and that's why blanket policies are a little tough. But that's why we need that discretion to allow the engineers to pull it down to a reasonable size where warranted.
All right. Any other? If I could speak to me and your discussion right quick, Mr. Wainwright, on the inspections. The reason you wanted the extra time, June 2018, was the inspectors is a major component of this, which you spoke to, and so I appreciate you letting me know. It's going to take some real, inspectors to know this and what they're doing, so it's not just hiring a guy that's looking at an electrical socket, so
Yeah.
just so Mr. LeBlanc knows, that's definitely intent of this jury is to have
Yeah.
great inspectors.
And so just so everyone will know on that, I mean, we intend to put the inspections we're talking about in this. Those guys will be added to the inspection program that the police jury already has. Remember, you do millions and millions of dollars worth of construction, same kind of construction on parish roads every day, all year. Tim has an inspection team. We're just going to be adding people to that. We totally agree with the comments, I do at least, on good inspection. I know Tim has the processes in place to get whoever he fills those spots up to speed and doing a quality job when the time comes.
Thank you, Mr. Wainwright. With that, Mr. Charlie Atherton, 122 Vine Street,
He may have moved.
unless you move.
Take your time, Charlie. Take your time.
Charlie Atherton, 122 Vine Street. Before I forget it, I'll just call him Mr. Bart. He spoke earlier. I think one of his comments resonated with everyone when he asked that you consider, you got so many things working at the same time. If you just got to vote this stuff in, if you just got to do it, delay the implementation to all the things that you've got working right now come together and then implement them. So that we would ask, I would reinforce his suggestion. I didn't want it to get lost, that just delay the implementation until you have everything that's working in place and considered. But and then one of the questions that kind of come to mind, and you was talking about the 25-year event, how long is it going to take the parish to bring the parish, the stuff the parish is responsible for, up to a 25-year plan? Will that ever happen, or is it cost prohibitive, or that'll, new development's going to immediately come to the 25-year plan if I understood it, but the parish is nowhere near that right now, which is part of the problem. So anyway, you don't have to answer it now, but at some point.
They've been, any new development, anything that we've done, we're already doing to that.
But there's a lot of.
I mean, I'm not sure exactly what specific project you're talking about.
Well, the drainage system on the roads, I don't believe would meet 25-year, because right now they'd be hard pressed to meet a 1.5 or 2 inch rain. So
I would, let's let Alan comment on that.
But it's just something I want you, at some point to take a look at.
All right, let's finish his comments, and then we'll try to wrap it all up.
No, I'm good. And then, but one of the concerns we have with the ordinance is we feel like, well, one, why shouldn't you qualify it in saying that subdivision ordinances apply to 10 homes or more, or something like that, so that the individual homeowner doesn't get hit with the full weight of all of this, just one person or one small landowner? Because the public perceives subdivision ordinances is like Mr. Anderpont said before, you know, a whole bunch of houses, a whole bunch of streets. But unless something has changed, and I didn't hear it mentioned, the full weight of these subdivision ordinances fall on the individual homeowner, the small landowner. And so they can get ground up with the system. So we're asking that you put a starting point, say 10 houses, 12 houses, some starting point. The other thing, we were happy that you did agree with the task force, but the general public assumed that the task force meetings would be open to the public to hear the discussion, to become educated and better informed. But as far as the majority of the landowners in the parish, the delay hadn't done us any good. I'm right back where I was. I mean, I'll take the blame for it, but I wasn't even aware until I saw it in the paper that new regulations had come out, so I scanned through them, but I'm not prepared to discuss them. But you know, it's good the APG and the experts have had the discussions, but unless it was open public meetings like a task force normally is, it doesn't benefit the majority of the landowners. And we were expecting jurors to be present. We wasn't expecting just closed-door meetings with the staff, with a few experts. The public wanted the benefit of the discussion. In the proposed ordinances, we see them, they're not really, we don't believe, a part of the total drainage solution. Right now, the retention ponds are going to cost landowners money, take hundreds of acres out of commerce, and create liability and health issues. What we would like to see is a master plan with a drainage maintenance plan already implemented, done first before you implement the ordinances. Now, any drainage plan that does not address the tidal issues is worthless to West Calcasieu. We're already facing that. So your master plan is going to have to address the tidal issues. It appears to us at face value that these drainage ordinances are simply trying to control the tide. You're trying to control the water level in the lakes, rivers, ship channels by not letting the water drain into the where it goes, into the ship channel. And when you require retention ponds on the side of the ship channel, I mean, that validates what you're trying to do. You're trying to control the water level in the ship channel that's controlled by not only sea level rise, subsidence, the moon, the south wind, but everything north of us.
You got about 1 minute left, Mr. Atherton.
But what we would like is for, what we need is a drainage system that totally drains the parish like it should drain if the ship channel is 15 feet lower, and then we figure out how to move the water after it gets to where it's supposed to drain before the ground sank. Now, true leadership would figure out a way to collect this valuable fresh water and sell it to West Texas. The sad thing about all of this is this water is worth money.
Is that exactly part of the ordinance? I'm just curious where that is in the ordinance, if you don't mind. I need to know.
But the ordinance should direct the rainwater, the excess rainwater, to a collection point. At some point, you guys, well, not you, maybe your grandkids, are going to have to pump it. It's got nowhere to go. And the master plan should show where you're going to pump it. Right now, the Sabine River Authority keeps it full because they make more money off of selling it for drinking water.
Ordinance. That's not on our ordinance.
Yeah.
I hate to keep cutting, but there's other people who want to speak directly to the ordinance tonight. We're going to have more meetings in the very near future. Title. I wish I could fix the title thing. I don't think I can.
The ordinance should include that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Atherton.
Let me make one comment.
All right,
I agree
Mr. Barris
with Charlie.
first.
And
Go ahead. Mr. Barris, okay, Mr. Atherton.
I agree with Charlie, and that we deferred this thing for this long, and this is the first meeting we've had since the last one we had. And I'm disappointed that we did not meet more than we did.
All right, Mr. Bears?
To speak to that, we've been up here several times. I was never under the impression that the task force didn't even want to have open meetings. They just wanted a task force. No one asked to be there. I've been on, I'm sorry, I got the floor. I've been on several task force committees that were not open, be it government or just work or whatever. I mean, just by calling it a task force doesn't insinuate at all that it should be open to the public. Secondly, about, us being responsible and get our business up to the 25-year standards, you got to understand there's a lot of things in play. You got municipalities, you got parish, and you got state government, okay? All in this footprint. Some of us keep our ditches up a lot better than others. I'm not saying any names. So if we get our stuff tip-top and it's going to one of the other entities' stuff that's not, so yeah, it's a little kind of far-fetched to think that, we should all be, pristine, and then it's actually as easy as you apparently think it is. Thank you.
That was a statement, not a question. All right.
It was a rebuttal to him.
Gotcha, awesome. All right, with that, we'll move to Mr. Wainwright. You didn't have any. All right, Mr. Raleigh Newman.
Good afternoon. I'm going to make everybody happy. I was not aware that the ordinances were available, so anything I would say would not be relevant, to be premature. Only thing I hope is that we don't try to go into too much detail for state of the art instead of just passing reasonable, workable, common sense ordinances. But that's all I can say because I haven't seen them, and I apologize for that. I didn't know they were available. Thank you. How's that?
All right.
Short enough?
If you got a few minutes anytime over the next week, I'm willing to sit down with you, Mr. Newman, and look at word by word with you.
This is the first time we've seen it.
All right, with that, we're going to go to Mr. Tim Flavin. Well, this is 20,000.
Talking about the revisions.
Mr. Chairman, Tim Flavin, 3221 Ryan Street, Lake Charles, Louisiana. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I was privileged to be part of the 3 years of meetings going back, and I know you limited it to talking about the ordinance, but I feel strong enough that we've talked 3.5 years on an ordinance that haven't talked and tying in maintenance and infrastructure, and also taking a look at an adequate system of governing our ditches. And I think it's real important to have those with this group and also the whole police jury, that those discussions are part of, along with this ordinance, because up till this afternoon, and I had the privilege of being in that meeting that our group had called, and had a great meeting with staff. Up to this point, it was like a total different entity, and we believe that it is not. We know the need for a drainage ordinance, whatever, but we also believe strongly that we need to have a scheduled maintenance program along with that ordinance, and also a list of infrastructure improvements, and also challenge the police jury to, when you're approving budgets, to make sure that we're increasing funding, because it's not getting better, it's getting worse. We have properties that we manage that have never flooded in 70 years and are flooding now. And so I just want to challenge you that. I know you don't want to talk about it. You got 15 days to, the way I look at it, you have 15 days before you vote on this. I'd love for you to have some discussion in that next 15 days to tie those to this ordinance. And I think our group would be, we would be supportive of that, you know, if that happens. But to keep them separate, I don't think is the answer. And we were also thrilled to hear of the FRQ that has been put out, as Bart stated, which we think is a big part of it, to take a good hard look to see what's happening. We appreciate you doing what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flavin. Mr. Guidry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a point of clarification, Mr. Wainwright. I think Mr. Atherton made a comment about some of the jurors in today's meeting or whatever. We should have been there. I have total confidence in your staff and you as to what you guys are doing, and Mr. Crane also. If there's meetings that we need to be at that need to be called by this group, any of us would be more than happy to be there. I don't want it to be looked at as if we're not wanting to be a part of what we're trying to do as a governing body. So just for clarification, if we need to be there, every one of us sitting up here will be more than happy to be at those meetings.
Thank you, President Guidry. Mr. Landry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian, and you know, they keep talking about projects. Y'all have been working on a number of different capital projects that address drainage issues all across the parish, and you've been doing that for, I don't know, the last year or so. Which a number of those are going to be done next year. I mean, they're going to be in this next budget, are they not?
Yes, or several will.
Okay.
That presentation.
When do we vote on our next budget?
Well, your actual vote on the final budget is in December, but the presentation that we do every year that puts out the proposed budget, which is going to be November 16th.
Well, that's then.
So
be the same.
We are going to include in that. So the proposed budget will be known in public then. It won't be December. That's just y'all's final vote. And I can assure you it will have a lot of money proposed for drainage projects to begin in 2018. And we want to start mirroring what we do with the road program. You can't get there overnight. What I mean is have a revolving 3-year plan. But 2018 is going to be a bigger start. We kind of have to get the ball rolling. But
right, and it'll never end. I mean, you're
right,
always going to have drainage.
So yes, we're going to have a lot of that. And you're right, Alan and his team have been working on that several months to the past year. This is a big effort, and we understand that there needs to be all of these done. We've always said that from the get-go.
All right, thank you.
Mr. White.
I'd just like to add to what Kevin had to say. I have gone to several of those meetings that you're talking about and have brought actual dirt contractors with me to where they could sit there and listen to some of the information that is given to us and actually help me understand exactly what they're wanting to do and with our drainage system, and ask for advice as far as what you were talking about, maintenance of our ditches and so forth. So yes, I have gone to several of those meetings. Thank you.
Just one quick follow-up.
Yes, sir.
As far as the capital projects, when Mr. Landry has to ask the staff what those are, not sure what they are, what we're interested in doing is listing those in priority of how they are going to help our total system or whatever, where we don't have to, where everybody knows it, public and everything.
And there'll be a list. I asked a question already, or I made a comment, I already knew the answer to the question. I just said it so we can say it out loud. There's a list, and it'll be public. Of course, you can't do them all at one time, but there's a list. And you'll know which ones are coming first. And they're doing the biggest bang for the buck first. I mean, that's the ones that they're going to do. But no, everybody up here should be aware of it. If they're not, all they do is ask. There's been a list for some time. Most all of that information came from public input back the last 2 or 3 years that people have turned in complaints and the different public meetings that we had.
Right. Thank you.
To include gravity drainage in all the municipalities.
Exactly.
All right, with that, we'll move to Mr. Art Little.
Art Little, 276 Andrew Young Road in Corliss. I'm here this evening to listen and understand and try to learn more about what is going to come before the zoning board in about 12 days. I am a member of the board, and I have to make a vote to make a recommendation to the Calcasieu Parish Police Jurors 3 days after that. Currently, I think the board, the staff has done a great job. I've always had good luck visiting with them, talking with them. They're a great group of people, and they do very well for Calcasieu Parish. But what I wanted to be here for is just to hear and listen. I know the ordinance is something that needs to be in place. From what I see, this ordinance, if it goes in place in November, 25 years, it may be making effect to the Calcasieu Parish because it's going to take that long to put a lot of this stuff into effect. The developments that's going to be taking place, reading through some of the language, you know, you got a 5-year plan before you ever start doing any development. So with 5 years and a 5-year growth to get it completed, you're already into 10 years. So it's going to be a while before all this really take effect to help our grandkids and our great-grandkids to see some effect to the drainage in Calcasieu Parish. I'm glad to hear about the budgets and the drainage issues and what's coming up. Some of the language that was spoken, it was in the mid-'80s that all the flooding really started in Calcasieu Parish. The first time Highway 27, which is now 1259, went underwater was in, I think it was 1988. In the last 6 months, it's gone underwater twice at the same level. Not only the Carlos area, but also in the Moss Bluff and the East Calcasieu Parish and South Lake Charles. So, I mean, we need this ordinance to go into effect if we can get the language right to satisfy that 51% of the taxpayers that live in the rural areas of Calcasieu Parish. There's a lot of good language in here, but like some of the gentlemen have spoke, there's a lot of language in here that has not convinced me as of yet that this is going to be the best thing for us to vote on in November. Now, I know there's some more meetings coming up. Mr. Rainwhite has done a wonderful job, he and his staff, of pulling this together, and I think they'll present something to us at our meetings that will help us make the right decision for our taxpayers. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your services.
Thank you, Mr. Little. Any comments for Mr. Little? All right, we have any comments, Mr. Wainwright? All right, committee members, Mr. McMillan.
Yeah, I've been sitting and listening. Thanks for all the folks that came out tonight. Really appreciate you being here and being involved in what we're trying to do with the drainage. We're all here to improve the drainage in Calcasieu Parish in southwest Louisiana. Alan had a quote when he said it. I wrote it down earlier tonight. It said, "You can always come back and adjust if needed." We need to start moving forward, and we're smart enough in this parish to know that there are going to be some points we may need to adjust when needed, and we're going to do that. We've got the capital project set up, the list that Chris was talking about. We've all seen what's going to be happening. We're going to do the ones with the biggest bang for their buck and move forward with this. But the people of Calcasieu Parish want to see this jury move forward. That's why I would really like to try to hold to the date of November 16th. Whatever meetings we have to have between now and then, let's get through it. Let's get something going that we can start working together. And I really appreciate with what the Alliance Group is doing in communication with us, and general public in general in communication with us. Thank you for being here. And I can tell you, we're up here trying to do the best we can. We all get the phone calls when people flood. And it hurts. It hurts to see people flooding in southwest Louisiana, and that's why we're trying so hard to do something. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other committee members? With that, I would like to, real quick, I want to go back to the intent of what we're doing, because sometimes we get lost in all of this, the details, but it's pretty clear in the very first slide. Our intent is to maintain or lower existing water surface elevation profiles in receiving systems. Our laterals are what we're addressing here. That's what we have to control. How much water are we going to continue to drain in an overburdened system? The next thing we talk about is to protect and enhance flood storage volumes within the established 100-year floodplain. We can't just keep moving the floodplain around. If we don't protect it where it is, FEMA will continue to move it wherever we put it, and we'll just put more people in jeopardy of having to pay flood insurance that they didn't have to pay yesterday. That is what we're trying to avoid. And the last thing is all new structures to build to a minimum freeboard requirement, so that when FEMA does change the elevation, just does change the floodplain, at least we've protected some people by having them build a little bit higher than what FEMA requires. And then if you go on to the next few slides that Mr. Wainwright talked about, that is our plan to address the intent of this ordinance. Those slides specifically talked about why these ordinance changes are important and the things that we're going to do to make sure our intent is taken care of. And the last thing is, it gives us now the tools. This ordinance will give us the tools to accomplish our intent. And just like Mr. McMillan said, it's got to be fluid. It's going to change a little, but it's time to move forward, and it's time to protect our parish. It is going to take 25 years, but guess what? In 25 years, it's going to have changed again. But I wish, as a young man, somebody would have changed the rules before I built, not in a floodplain, but in a floodplain today. And my business was not set up to carry that load, but I own it. And so that's where I am today. I don't want somebody to be in the position I'm in today because this body did not move forward to protect our parish in the future. And I'll leave that where it is.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion to adjourn. Second.